Awesome.
What? I'm listening to my class and I'm talking.
We're
Okay.
waiting for the rabbi to come here.
Okay, I'll call back later, okay?
Bill.
The rabbi.
He is on, but not there. He is.
There he is. He's there.
Oh, okay.
Yes, see, they are scheduling it and they want me coming at 1 o'clock. I can't make it at 1 o'clock.
Good morning, everyone. And,
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
say a prayer from my computer.
Where is my luck?
Baruch atah Adonai. We were just commenting about the memorial service yesterday for Rhoda. Well done, Rabbi. Very
Wow.
well.
Yeah, that was a very nice service.
Thank you.
It was amazing. Babette, where were you? I looked for you.
I had planned to come, but I wasn't able to make it. And
Okay.
I felt very warm towards Rhoda. She and Sonny came out one year and stayed with Alan and I in Marina Del Rey. So we hosted them one summer.
Very nice.
Morning, Dee.
I can hear your voice is kind of raspy even today. You're okay.
Yes, and I had a doctor's appointment. I had someone who was willing to take me, but I had a doctor's appointment at just the time. I knew.
Let us begin. Again, please remember to mute yourselves if you're not speaking and to make your videos so we can see your smiling faces and be respectful of others, of course. Let us begin with the blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech asher kitanu v'tzivanu.
Oh, I put a new.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the world, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanded us to engage in the words of Torah. Amen. Good, Rabbi, she's all yours.
Good morning, everybody. We are on page 122. And so this is Perek Aleph, Biblical Medicine, Ritual, and Ethics. Does everybody have that? And welcome back to Miriam. And congratulations to Ray on her celebration of her second anniversary of her bat mitzvah. And I see we're missing Riva today, so.
She's here.
Okay, there she is. So anyway, yes, we grieve with the Edwards family in their loss, and we're all missing Rhoda. And this morning I did a pet memorial service. So there's a lot, unfortunately, of loss and death, and there's it's part of the cycle of life, and we have to accept it as best we can. One of the things that the ancients did to try to at least delay death, of course, was medicine. And medicine in the ancient world was reflected in different ways. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about viruses. They didn't know about infection. So they were at a huge disadvantage. Can everyone hear and see me okay so far? No problems. Okay, no problems at all. Okay, good, good. I had a backup laptop setup system, but I'm going to close that, and hopefully it'll continue to be okay. So you can imagine that if we went back, we're going back in the biblical times to, let's say, 2,500 years ago, that the fear of all the things that we fear were there. But the knowledge of what causes those things and what might cure them was obviously much, much less. And so you're in a situation where your leg hurts or your stomach hurts or whatever, and you really have no idea what it is. And there were primitive doctors, but they don't have the scientific knowledge to really, tell you a whole lot. Even if their theoretical knowledge is okay, which it wasn't, then they don't have MRIs, they don't have X-rays, they don't have any of the tools that modern medicine used to see what's going on. And of course, even as late as the medieval period, they had the bloodletting, right? So you had a disease, they would just have you bleed on the theory that the blood was holding the disease. And if they let enough blood out, that the disease would just go out with the blood. I mean, there may be some logic to that, but it wasn't going to, today we know that just weakened the patient because they had less blood. And if the infection is inside the body, and letting out part of your blood is not going to solve it. So that's the sort of the background to this. Here, a lot of this is specifically related to certain types of skin infections or skin diseases. And we'll look at this. This is broadly part of, all of the rather technical and gooey kinds of things that we have encountered in Leviticus. And, but Harvey Fields is very good at taking arcane subjects and drawing meaning out of them and saying what might be something we can relate to. And as you saw on page 123, he talks about the offerings of the poor and the need to keep things affordable. And in this time, in these inflationary times, some of that may be very appropriate for public policy today. Okay, so that's just a very short opening comment. If you have a couple of other comments or brief directives or questions, this is a good time. Bernie.
I just want to say to anybody here who may be over 50 that CDC has approved a second booster, in case you
What
didn't
I'm
know.
doing now, yeah.
Yes, and there was a study in Israel that just was published yesterday that really did kind of confuse me, because they studied 125,000 people who had gotten the fourth shot, and 111,000 people, almost the same number, who had only gotten 3 shots. And they found that in the group that had only gotten 3 shots, 32 people died. And in the group that had gotten 4 shots, only 5 had died. And so somehow from this, they concluded that the 4th shot for people over 60 was very, very useful. But I didn't quite understand why, because when we're talking about over 100,000 people in each group, the difference of 27 people is an extremely small number. And it would seem that those people were probably very, very sick anyway. But the conclusion of the doctors there was very clear that they recommend it. But it'd be worth looking at that study, and if anyone can explain why they reach the conclusions they reach, let me know. You give me a call or whatever. Thank you, Bernie. Other comments directly on the theme of today? Yes, Miriam, and then
I just want to make a comment that when I was reading the Parsha, it was very interesting to me that this bacteria of all kinds have existed far, far back, maybe, I don't know when all this started, but that the bacteria have been in existence all this time. As we've gone along, we've found, like now, we have a lot of vaccines, etc. But back then, it was probably awful being sick like that, not knowing what to do about it. They didn't have the medicine man. The medicine man was the priest. And it must have been very difficult for them. It was just a comment that I thought about.
And it's ironic in some ways because the Kohanim, the priests, of which I am one, as I keep reminding everybody, it was in those days, basically, as Miriam says, the medicine man or the doctor. But in today's Orthodox world, they don't really allow Kohanim to become doctors because a Kohen is not allowed, or is according to halacha, is not supposed to come in contact with a dead body, which is a source of impurity. And so I remember when I was going to Yeshiva University, and there were more Orthodox students who were Kohanim, and they wanted to go to medical school, and they were told, no, that's not allowed.
Oh,
And which is interesting. And
yes.
you know, of course, anyone with any sense would ignore that because really the whole prohibitions of Kohens coming in contact with impurity is if there were to be a third temple, and if the Kohen was then called to service, he should be in a constant state of purity as much as possible. But there's no temple. They're not going to build a temple while you're in medical school. It's not going to happen over the next 4 years. So the idea that, you know, and of course, medical students spend at least a year dissecting a cadaver, which would put them into impurity, but you can purify yourself by going to a mikveh. So the whole thing didn't make sense to me, but, you know, Orthodoxy develops its own rules, and those rules are pretty stringent under certain times. But the Kohanim and the doctors were the same group. Today, of course, there are no functioning Kohanim, but rabbis and doctors are pretty much separate groups. There are, you know, occasionally a doctor rabbi, but I've only known a couple of them. And there's one guy I know, he's from Argentina, and he was a doctor, and then he went back to become a rabbi. But the combination didn't go together all that well. So it's not something that I would recommend necessarily. Thank you, Miriam. Any other comments? Yes, Rochelle.
Yeah. First off, I appreciate everything Miriam just said. And honestly, Rabbi, I want to see that show you're making, Dr. Rabbi. You need to make that show. I totally watch it. But you can star in it. It'll be great. But I just wanted to say, and I think I've mentioned it before, it just floors me, the amount of information that they had, yet they had no information that they were able to isolate dead bodies and why. They knew so much about so much that other religions did not know at that time. In studying many, many religions, a lot of times these things were attributed to demons. They were not attributed to uncleanliness and things like that. So I just want to say that this is one respect that I have of this religion, and I just think it's amazing. I think it's amazing the level of intelligence that was in the tribes.
Yes, so they were very bright, and they applied their there's different kinds of logic. There's there's two types, but I forget the names and I don't know the differences. So I'm sorry, but there's different types of thinking, and they tried to apply what thinking they could to what they observed, and you can observe quite a bit. So sometimes, however, what you observe may be misleading for various reasons. So They didn't get everything right, but you can see how they made a huge effort to try to understand what was going on and to take the best public health responses they could, and to also integrate it into a ritual system. So even though what we read isn't going to be useful today in practice, you can see that they were very advanced for their times. I saw a hand. Sai.
What you say is interesting, but I would think that because they are quote unquote bright people, they might have researched or extended themselves as far as trying to find out more about the disease and sickness from other groups. But I get the impression that the priests wanted to keep control over the whole situation, and they weren't about to go beyond the boundaries that they themselves have set up.
And be careful what you say, Sai, because as you know, I am a priest, and you know,
you like to keep tight boundaries.
And yes, we did want to keep control of things, and eventually, you know, we lost control of things. So I'm still upset about that 2,000 years later, but what can I do? Okay, let's start reading. We're on page 122. We're going to see how biblical medicine responds to dermatological problems and how they ritualize all of that. And this is a double portion, Tazria Mitzora, so it's two separate portions that are frequently put together. And in our case this year, I don't think we are merging them, but Harvey Fields does. Okay, who'd like to read? Okay, Minya.
Parshat Tazria and Metzora presents us with what seems like a discussion of skin diseases and bodily infections. We are told that upon finding a swelling, rash, or discoloration on the skin that results in a scaly infection, a person is to report the problem to the priest. This is also to be done if a person notices loss of hair, fungus on clothes, or mold on the walls of a home. All of these are signs of sarat, a variety of skin diseases, and of being considered tameh, unclean or impure. Same applies to a person whose sexual organs are infected. In all these situations, waiting periods of healing are prescribed, as are ritual offerings at the sanctuary after one has been cured and pronounced clean.
Okay, thank you. Stop there. So there's a lot of stuff here. So there's the public health level, there's the medical level of the patient, there's the ritual level. Any comments about any of these two paragraphs? Rochelle.
I just think that especially when it's speaking of, first off, I believe they're talking about leprosy for the most part when they're talking about the skin diseases. I think some of this is in reference to leprosy, which was smart. They knew to do this, and it kept others probably safe. But when it comes to the sexual diseases, it was, again, it's odd that they comment on that and that they recognize that, because so many people for years and centuries have died of syphilis, literally. And they obviously knew that something was wrong with when you had these different problems, and they were able to recognize and help people keep safe.
So if somebody had, what is it called? If their sexual organs are infected, they basically isolate them so that they won't infect other people, but they call it a period of uncleanliness, ritual uncleanliness, but it also served a public health function as well. So
Yeah.
you're kind of doing two things at once. And of course, being priests and being a religion, the ritual element is emphasized perhaps, but the public health benefits are clear. What about all this skin stuff? Swelling, a rash, discoloration, any kind of skin problem, a scaly infection. That could be a lot of different things, right? You know, it could be allergies, it could be psoriasis, it could be autoimmune disorder of the skin, it could be bacterial infection, it could be a mosquito bite, some sort of bite, could be a lot of different things. Rochelle.
Well, and with that, that's why they had the priest check everything. You know, they would first isolate when it was noticed, and then after, I believe it was 7 days, they would check it. If it's not spread, then the person is deemed unclean, you know, is deemed clean again. Or if hair had not turned color like it does in leprosy, and different situations, they were deemed okay to be around other people. They were no longer isolated. I mean, I'm not too into the ritual part of it because I believe when people are ill, they still should have the right to practice. But if they're considered infectious, perhaps it's best.
And the loss of hair, fungus on clothing, or even mold on the walls of a home. So mold on the walls of a home can actually be very dangerous, right? Like, and so they, you know, it does appear, like Rochelle said earlier, that a lot of these things which are labeled as ritual are, you know, were figured out by early medical experts they didn't have the theory, but they just figured out what might be harmful. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like most of these things are going to be helpful. Pam.
How did they work that out if the male priest had to do if the person who needed to be inspected was a woman?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea. Anybody? I mean, in later Judaism, they'd have a system like with the mikveh, when a woman has to immerse in the mikveh and they need witnesses, have to be male in Orthodoxy. You would have like a women's surrogate actually observing the woman in the mikveh, and then the rabbis would be on another side of a curtain or a wall or something like that. How they did in this case, I don't know. I mean, we only have what's in the Torah text. We don't even know if this was actually applied, you know, so we don't know a lot of stuff. But I don't think that they would have allowed the priest to examine a naked woman, but I don't know.
How about the Rebbitzin?
There were no Rebbitzins. There are no rabbis. This is before there was a rabbis or anything like that. So we're dealing with the ritual experts the religious experts are the Kohanim, are the priests. There are no rabbis. And later the rabbis are going to come along. This is going to be called the Pharisees. And there's going to be a competition between the priests and the rabbis who's going to run Judaism. But that's still 300 or 400 years in the future. Minya.
Did they have midwives?
Presumably, yes, because there were a story of the midwives in the book of Exodus about the, so presumably the midwives would have done the exam on behalf of the Kohanim.
Yep, that makes sense.
And reported that. But I don't know that to be true, but that seems like a reasonable assumption. Other comments, Rochelle?
I just wanted to say also, you know, because women are wonderful, they probably just trusted us, you know, as women. If the women said yes, everything's done and over, the men are like, of course. We didn't need any supervision. We had it. we had control.
And it's Ellen.
I'm wondering if there's a parsha that deals with other illness. It seems to me that this is what they could see is the only thing that they were worried about is
Right.
what was visible. What about
Right.
the invisible part of it? You know,
Yeah.
the illness that's from within as opposed to from without.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, and this connects to the ritual, you know, when they could see something wrong, whether, and it could be almost anything, you know, could be a swelling, a rash, a discoloration, anything on the skin in particular. That was the very first thing we talked about here. So Ellen's point that they seem maybe overly concerned with what they can see, whereas other things, what about if you just start losing weight, you know, or you have internal pains or anything like that? And, you know, that's not spoken about, at least not here, and not in this biblical account. So we'll have to watch and wait to see if other information comes from other sources. But if Ellen, if you're asking me, do I know exactly what is in other parts of the 5 books of Moses about this? Not really. Not, you know, I don't recall any section that went into a holistic approach to health and medicine. You know, it's, you know, more specific like this. And clearly it kind of intersects that the priests must have been actually interested in purity and impurity. And they're trying, you know, you could almost see them like, how do we determine who's pure and impure? And then one priest said, you know, well, you've got these people coming with all these bruises and scratches and swellings on their skin. These people can't be pure. And then another priest said, all right. And so it wasn't like they were necessarily, you know, doctors who were interested in only public health issues, like how do we determine who's sick and who's not? It seemed to actually be an intersection of certain ritual issues and certain medical issues. And within that particular focus, they seemed to get it pretty much right, but they seemed to ignore, you know, other things. You know, the Kohanim were not doctors. They were ritual experts, and they were ritual experts, you know, looking at ritual from a 2,500-year perspective back. Ellen, comment?
Do you think that that they interpreted that kind of illness as some kind of evil?
Kind of. It doesn't seem to go into too much about that, but they talk about purity and impurity, and impurity presumably is something bad. And so if you have a swelling on your arm, that could be that's a sign that you're impure. And if you're impure, that's not good. I mean, I don't know if
I
I'd
have
use
it off the hook.
I'm using it.
That's
I don't know. I don't know if I'd use the word evil. There's not really any indication here that evil is really the thing, but
or non-observant, or, you know,
something
it's kind of
like
like
that.
what Rochelle was mentioning before about leprosy. You know, they took people who had that disease and isolated them in some cultures. Particularly, we know of Hawaii, where they had a whole island for them. But, you know, so it seems that, like, oh, you're bad. Maybe not evil, but you're, you know, something's impure, meaning bad. So I just feel bad for anybody who had acne.
Yeah, well, someone with acne would have been labeled as impure, and you know, and today we know it's strictly a medical problem, you know, that can be dealt with acne medicines, but they didn't quite have that concept then. Yes, Miriam.
They were so smart back then. I wonder why it took them so long to discover the reasons for this. I wonder why they didn't start to find out why these people are having these problems.
Well, it took until relatively recently. When did the whole concept of what bacteria and viruses were discovered? It wasn't much more than 100 years ago. It required technological innovations such as microscopes and other things, and basically you needed a technology to see what was going on that was only going to be, that only came about in the modern times. Bernie.
I'm wondering whether this was really a prevalent problem since so much space is devoted to it here.
Okay, that I'd answer that in two ways. First of all, I think yes, there were a lot of people with different kinds of skin disorders. And number two, I think that irrespective of how common it was, it does show the priests are really, really obsessed with this issue of purity and impurity. And this is a category of thinking that is absent in modern Judaism. We don't really have anything about purity and impurity in the sense that they did in the book of Leviticus. So it's a completely foreign concept for us. It's very difficult to understand. I think Ellen asked whether it was evil, and I didn't really like that. I wasn't sure that was the right word, but there's something that is a very strong motivator that they want to prevent something. I can use the word impurity, but we're not sure what that means. But this is very important for them. Marcia, and then Sai, and then D.
And D. And D. I had it right. Okay. Do the modern, I shouldn't say modern, do today's Orthodox still adhere to these kind of practices and these beliefs?
Well, all of this was predicated on having a temple or having a tabernacle.
True.
So this would be, of the 613 mitzvot that we all heard that number, that includes like 250 or 300 that are only doable if there's a temple. And so a lot of these things are not really applicable, under the current circumstances. But in theory, I guess that, they haven't officially been wiped off the books, as you might say. Okay, Sai, and then D, and then is Steve have a hand up? Okay, Sai.
What I'd like you to explain is, what do you mean by purity of the temple? What does that mean exactly to you?
I can't explain it exactly, Sai. This is something very different than anything we would be familiar with, and what made someone pure, impure is really hard to explain. But contact with dead bodies made you impure. A seminal emission would make you impure. A menstruating woman would make her impure, and if you touched her, you make you impure. Any sort of action which was inappropriate, such as stealing, might make you impure. A mixture of the physical and the medical and the ritual things might make you impure. So again, I'm not really comfortable with the word evil, but I'm looking for the right word, and it's clearly something that is not good. But in today's world, many of these things would just be seen as natural, as part of biology. Others would be seen as perhaps moral flaws. but only some. So it's I don't understand it myself, but I think my point here is that it was really important to them, the authors of this section in Leviticus. Okay, D and then Reva.
I wanted to ask today with the Orthodox, with regard to a woman after her cycle, do they still practice that? And after a baby, do they still have to go to the mikveh?
Maybe Reva and Marcia want to respond. Reva?
Yeah, yes to all of that.
They still do that?
Yeah, they do.
Wow.
And matter of fact, in Orthodox homes, there's always there are always twin beds in the parents' room, in the adults' room, so that when the woman is impure, they can separate the beds.
Okay. Got it.
And then she has to wait for 7 days after the last time she's seen any blood. And then she goes to a mikveh to repurify. There's also after a baby, same thing. And one of the problems was if it's a male baby, the woman's impure for 7 days. If it's a female baby, 14 days. And that is cited by not just feminists, but just anyone as seeming to be rather biased. But that's the way it was. Reva and then Minya.
Yeah, I thought the inclusion of the house and the clothing or cloth as being pure or impure was also very interesting. And my take on it comes from the right side of page 122 in the middle, where it says that these visible imperfections were the result of God's displeasure. And so it seems to me that they were thinking of as these visible, imperfections or whatever you want to call them, fungus or disease or whatever, were related, where the etiology is God's displeasure. It's not something else.
Mm-hmm. Etiology, where it comes from.
Yeah, the only thing I see here is that these imperfections are visible results of God's displeasure, and I see that it's a second full paragraph on the right hand side at the bottom. They concluded that they must be the result of God's displeasure and that they endangered both the individual infected and the community.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that we would not accept today. So if you have suddenly a outbreak on your left arm of a rash, we don't interpret that as God is mad at you. We interpret that as you have some sort of a dermatological medical problem and you better see a dermatologist today. But we don't make a moral judgment about your rash. So it's a different world, it's a different etiology. The word that Reva used is where does it come from? What causes it? But I guess we're also looking at the other end is how do you interpret that, that fact? And I guess we would interpret it differently. I see B's hand. Was there somebody in line first or? Yes, Minya and then B.
I just have to comment about going to the mikveh after you have a baby. I think that having a baby is a gift from God, and to be thought of as unclean because you just had a child, that just rubs me the wrong way. And I don't understand. All right, it goes back to the times maybe we're reading because they didn't know anything else. But even in current times, that people would still think that way. I guess I'll never be Orthodox because I have a problem with that.
We don't have Sarah Jane here from the Religious Practices Committee, but if the Religious Practices Committee vote to turn the whole temple Orthodox, then we'll all, Nana's shaking her head, no way. Pam is, B is, well, you know, you know. Okay, B, did you speak already? No. Okay, B, you have to unmute and then.
What I wanted to say is that some people still think in the ancient way. My father blamed himself for my sister dying because sometimes he had to work on Sabbath. And it was pretty terrible the way he did that. But this relates to thinking that God is punishing you. And it hasn't died. My father, I was brought up conservadox. It has not died.
Yes, I mean, I heard a family where there was a tragedy in the family, and they expressed something very similar. You know, they said, you know, they were like, we didn't go to synagogue last year on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. We ignored the whole high holy days. And of course, I joke about this, but this is one of the motivators for people. You know, I joke if I could be more like a Southern Baptist preacher and say if people don't come to temple, that they're going to, you know, burn in hell forever, I could get more people to come to temple. But of course, that's not the way Reform Judaism works. We're enlightened and we understand that we have to motivate people to think about and practice religion through meaning, and by motivating them to understand that they want to understand more and they can benefit from such enlightenment, and not to use primitive, you know, threats of divine retribution to get them to do what the rabbi might want. But, you know, so you do have this, but not very often. I've only heard a couple of cases like this. Most people are, you know, but there was tremendous amount of superstition. And, you know, if you watch the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man, which was about a conservative synagogue in Minnesota in the 1960s, you know, this comes up that, you know, the protagonist is and has a series of crises in his life. And at one point it suggested to him that, you know, it must be something that he's doing, that God is angry with him. Okay, who is reading? Okay, Minya, are you ready to keep going?
In these chapters of Leviticus, we have an important view of ancient medicine and ritual. The priest functions not only in his religious role, but also as a kind of diagnostician. As modern biblical scholar Baruch A. Levine notes, the priest combined medical and ritual procedures in safeguarding the purity of his sanctuary and of the Israelite community, which was threatened by the incidence of disease. He instructed the populace and was responsible for enforcing the prescribed procedures.
Okay, so stop there for a moment. It's interesting that Levine talks about safeguarding the purity, and he mentions first the sanctuary and only second the Israelite community. I wouldn't think you'd have to worry about the sanctuary. It would be the community, you know, certainly from a public health point of view, if you're dealing with AIDS or COVID or any disease, you're not going to, for example, be worried about safeguarding the Capitol building. You'd be worried about safeguarding the health of the politicians in the Capitol building. But here, the sanctuary itself has a certain importance, a paramount importance above the community. I found that very interesting. Responses or comments?
Yeah.
All right. Rochelle, was that a hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I believe that was because that is where God dwelled with him. That is where he said, you know, so don't, that's all I can say about that. That is where God dwelled with them.
So
That's-
therefore, you don't want to bring impurity into the presence of God, or you might actually infect God.
Well, in the way that it's written in the Torah that I understand, it would be that you don't want to bring impurities into the presence of God.
And so here again, you see the emphasis on biblical religion, on purity for its own sake, you know, and Sai's question hangs heavily over today. You know, what exactly is purity and impurity? And that's a question that we're not going to be able to fully answer today. Ellen or Pam, comments or questions? No. Okay. Marcia or Miriam? D or Steve? Okay, anyone else? Okay, we're back to you, Minya.
Most Torah interpreters throughout the ages, however, have not considered these chapters about skin infection to be a collection of medical instructions. Priests prescribe rituals. They do not dispense treatments or medication. Even the use of quarantine regulations shows very little regard for guaranteeing public health. They are more a form of ritual than a means of isolating sick people. For instance, there is no mention of preventing healthy people from contact with the contents of a house where disease has been discovered. If, as most interpreters suggest, these commandments having to do with infections are not strictly medical instructions, then what significance did they have to the people of Israel? The ancients were undoubtedly baffled by skin diseases. Swellings, rashes, boils, and skin discolorations must have frightened and bewildered them. So did molds and fungi on the walls of homes, or infections associated with sexual organs. Often they watched these symptoms progress into terminal diseases. Knowing little about the cause or treatment of such infections, they concluded that they must be the result of God's displeasure and that they endangered both the individual infected and the community. That may explain why those diagnosed with such infections or those whose homes were discovered with a threatening fungus were labeled unclean and isolated from the rest of the community. In ancient times, such people were considered cursed by God and impure. Touching them or anything that they may have touched could spread the curse to others.
All right, stop for a minute. I mean, Harvey Fields is getting very, I mean, he's going in the opposite direction. This is not high scholarship. He's kind of suggesting that this is, it reads almost like he's suggesting that that the biblical account is very primitive and is pandering to the lowest common denominator of fear of disease. But let's hear some other responses. Bernie, you agree with Harvey Fields? Okay.
I neither agree nor disagree.
Okay. Marcia?
I can understand this because some infections are transmittable, so I could understand that they may not have been able to separate out what was and what wasn't something that could spread. But I want to go back to the purity thing. From what we've been reading about the sanctuary, keeping it pure seems to be keeping it a place where there is nothing distractingly either medically bad, the smells in there have to be good, the appearance of it has to be beautiful. It lends to contact with God in the purest way. And so you don't allow anything into the sanctuary that's going to be distracting to your connection with God. And I think that's where the purity is. Not that I agree with them with all this stuff, but I think that's what they were thinking about. I mean, so that's where I think.
But you were reading something.
Okay, Rochelle.
It just caught my attention. What was so special about the priest that everyone else had to be away from people, but the priests themselves could be exposed to these things to check them? Do you believe that maybe they felt the priests were blessed by God, that they would not contract these things? That's why they could check people's houses out when other people weren't allowed to be there. Why they did check the skin infections when they had to be isolated from everyone else.
I'm a little puzzled by that, Rochelle, because as I said earlier, the Kohanim are the prohibition of Kohanim coming into contact with impurity is stricter than for the average person. So I don't understand how they could be allowed to check anything out, because they're the ones that have to be, they're the ones that were assigned a hereditary role, which in Reform Judaism we don't accept. So that's why I've lost my status as a Kohen completely, because it's hereditary. I can become a rabbi by studying, and then I have a certain status, but it's from studying. I can't claim the Kohen status because it's not based on anything I did that's so wonderful. It's based on the fact that my father was a Kohen, and that's not acceptable in Reform Judaism. We're egalitarian. Everybody should be given the equal chance to study and strive and achieve. So but in the Bible, the Kohanim were hereditarily given the role of ritual experts and the ones to perform the sacrifices in the tabernacle or the temple. How you could allow them to come into contact with impurity to check it out, I don't think that would have been allowed. So there's a lot unspoken here. And again, I'm not really sure this was ever implemented. It may just be a theoretical statement from some priestly source who said, this is the way I'd like things to be, and it may not be thought out fully. Miriam?
I have a comment on the word curse. When I got my period, this was a long time ago, somebody said to me, oh, you got the curse. And I wondered if this is a throwback to what they said about the curse that we were just reading.
Well, it might be part of it, and this might be the origin of that idea that when a woman gets her period, that is not something biological and normal, but is somehow a curse of Eve, that this was somehow a part of the punishment that God gave to Eve because she ate of the fruit, which probably was not an apple, but rather a pomegranate or a fig or something. But whatever it was she ate, God's angry at her and all of the future females all the way down. But that's not an idea that we would accept in Reform Judaism at all, obviously. But yeah, good point, Miriam. Marcia.
So does that mean that having children is a curse upon women?
Yeah, they said that. I think it's in the Bible that it said that.
Depends on
the child. But it does say in the Bible that part of this, Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and the punishment for eating the fruit is that they now have to wander the earth, and instead of getting everything delivered to them like an all-inclusive hotel, they now have to farm or hunt or figure out how to eat so they don't starve. and that women have to deal with pregnancy and childbirth, which was very painful. And
This is how it started. Okay.
but you know, but this is to use Riva's term, this is an etiological explanation, meaning that men saw women suffering in childbirth, and they said, why are women suffering like this? Well, it must be something that they did. And then the story was either written or adjusted to, you know, explain something like that, you know. And okay. Ray, Riva, Ellen.
I think that there was a lot of so much mystery, but it didn't just happen in the times of the Bible. It seems to have followed through the whole Middle Ages, constantly. There was a golem. I really don't know much about a golem in the Middle Ages, but it was some kind of a devil. And this superstition about not hanging clothes outside on a rope because it might injure the infant in your body. There were a lot of things like that. My father once told me a very queer story about the Passover story. They used long sticks and in some of their ceremonies in other religions. For instance, the story he told me was that when Moses appeared with this long rod and it changed to a snake. And then it was so common among the Egyptian priests that they all knew this trick. Snake already that probably was either given some kind of sedative and all of a sudden would come to life. So there was always a mishigas from the outer world. They were Jews were always affected by what was going around them, as well as among themselves. That's what
Thank you, Ray. Who is next? Riva.
Yeah, I was struck by the issue of touching, that if you touch somebody who's impure, that you know, the impure could pass to you also. And I remember when I spent a lot of time with Orthodox people, you have to learn really fast that you don't put your hand out to shake hands or hug, God forbid, because men do not touch women, period.
Because yes, I was going to correct you. I don't have any problems shaking hands with Orthodox rabbis.
Well, it depends on what gender you are.
Right.
is the variable. But yeah, you know, I remember going to a wedding, an Orthodox wedding, and we had friends come who were not Orthodox. And, you know, you'd spot them immediately. They'd stick their hand out to shake hands and be surprised when, you know, the other person did not respond. Also with Orthodox men, the really Orthodox men, they won't even make eye contact with women other than their spouse.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose their children.
Sounds like Mike Pence.
Yeah, well, there's a certain similarity, yes, that Mike Pence follows some of the similar, rules for similar reasons. But some of the Orthodox rules are not necessarily completely crazy. So, for example, the rules of Yichud, where it says that a man and a woman should not be in a closed house alone unless they are, involved. But, in today's world, you would, that is becoming more and more common sense. To avoid potentially career-ending fake accusations. So you want to avoid any situation as much as possible where anyone can make any sort of a claim. So what 30 years ago seemed crazy today would be not so
Normal.
crazy. And it's interesting how the liberal and the conservative end of things in some ways are coming closer to each other. Pam.
Dave's brother, the Orthodox rabbi, used to walk around a wedding, etc., with his hands behind his back like Prince Philip, so that he never had that. Anyway, the main thing I wanted to talk about, what I found fascinating about this whole parsha is their God was a micromanager God, not like our God, which is a more big picture God. But I mean, their God goes around cursing certain people, doing this and that. And we've sort of gotten away from that idea that, God's in the hunt for, disciplining individual people.
Although I got an email this morning that God is joining our finance committee. So there are exceptions when God feels he needs to get involved in the minutia of things, but God.
No, I think that's Biden that's going to join your finance committee.
With a sack of gold?
Yeah, that's not going to go well.
Miriam.
I have a little story to tell you that was very interesting. When I lived in Panama, they had very big parties. And this was a Jewish party. I can't remember whether it was a wedding, whatever. And there were about 1,000 Orthodox Jews there. And Dan and I were invited. We were late. Dan had been busy. And when we came in, all the rabbis were standing there. The Reform rabbi, the Orthodox rabbi, and so on, and our rabbi from the Canal Zone. Well, we went over. Of course, I kissed our rabbi. I kissed the Reform rabbi, and then I kissed the Orthodox rabbi. Accidentally. Well, I could hear this, ooh, going through the whole room, and I was so embarrassed. But he handled it very nicely, and he took me around, and everything was fine. But everybody else came up to me later and said, Miriam, you kissed the Orthodox rabbi. I said, it was just natural for me to go do that. But I have never forgotten that, because that was such an embarrassing incident for me to have kissed an Orthodox rabbi.
Was that Rabbi Levy?
What?
Was that Rabbi Levy?
Yes, it was Rabbi Levy. Did you know Rabbi Levy?
I knew his son, Chaim.
Oh, well, some of them became rabbis, I think. One of his sons was very ill, and Dan took care of him. And so he felt very close to me, but I just went from one to the other because we were late and I was worried about it. And it was, but everybody else let me know that I kissed the rabbi.
And it was interesting because before COVID, when we took the Torah around, pretty much every woman wanted to kiss me on both cheeks. And in retrospect, when you read books on COVID, and they were talking about it in December and January. By January, all the governments and people knew that there was this pandemic in the process. And we were in early March still kissing like that. I mean, I was being kissed by virtually every woman in the entire sanctuary. So if one person had been infected, we would have potentially infected the whole temple.
Yes.
And in retrospect, it just seems unbelievable that we were so naive. And of course, now we've started the Torah processional again. And, you know, at first I wore a mask and I avoided contact, and now I'm not wearing a mask and I'm shaking hands. And you see how quickly old habits reassert themselves. And so maybe the fact that they wanted to ritualize it and say it's prohibited and it makes you impure, and if you touch, then you have to go into a tent for 7 days. It's a way to really enforce public health. But of course, Harvey Field said it's not really public health. And hi, Nan, welcome back. And so we're left with this source in Leviticus, which is not entirely clear what it means, how it was practiced, if it was practiced, you know. So we're trying to decipher it, but without additional information, what would really help is to have be able to interview several people who were around at that time, and they could say, oh, we did this, or we didn't do this, or the priest told us this, or nobody followed that, or, you know, but we don't have that. And so we don't really know. Okay, any other comments? If not, Minya, you're doing a great job. So back to you.
Thank you. The important matter here, however, was not only looking for signs that the infected person had been cured, but guaranteeing the community that the curse would not doom everyone. For that reason, priests not only examined the infected person or home, they also conducted special rituals in the sanctuary, celebrating the end of the infection. Their medical ritual procedures were meant not only to provide some elementary sanitary safety for the community, but more significantly, to save the community from spreading among them what they understood as God's curse. Because of the diagnosis of such infections and the rituals celebrating their conclusion affected everyone in the community, the services of priests had to be accessible, and the cost of sanctuary offerings had to be affordable to everyone. Essentially, public need necessitated ethical and economic fairness. If the offerings required by the infected person could not be brought to the sanctuary because they were not affordable, the entire community might suffer a continuing curse. For that reason, the Torah commands that if a person is poor and cannot afford to bring birds, lambs, hyssop, cedar wood, crimson stuff, choice flour, and oil as offerings for the altar of the sanctuary, 1 lamb, 1/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in, 2 turtle doves or pigeons within his means may be acceptably substituted. In this way, the poor were equal to those who could afford the medical ritual procedures required. This reduction in the cost of offerings for the poor is mentioned several times in the Torah.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Here we get into a sort of a Obamacare program. Riva, Babette?
I love the idea of a sliding scale based on income. I think that's a wonderful concept, and you know, and showing up this early is beautiful.
And Harvey Fields basically says they had no choice because you can't have a situation where people who are impure cannot remediate that. You know, they have to. There has to be a way they can do it, or else you've effectively created an untouchable class. And I don't know much about Indian society, but maybe they had something like that where there was like a permanently untouchable, but Judaism never had that. And so you've got to, by Shirley, you've got to have a way that everybody can participate in the purification. Any other comments? Pam?
Well, I think it's good that our fundraising, we require our version of shekels and don't allow them to bring offerings of birds. Otherwise, 2 turtle doves.
It was perfectly economical. The Kohanim took a portion. They burned up relatively little, and then some of it came back to the people. So depending on what kind of sacrifice, but you think taking money is more efficient. Well, okay, Dee or Marcia or Minya, any comments? Okay, back to you, Sai.
I want to ask this question. There's been a lot of discussion about all the effort that goes in to maintain the temple. The Bible has been filled with prose about the temple. What I'm curious about is what is the temple directly doing for the people? As a temple, what is it doing for the people?
That's a very good question. So, in scholarship, there's a big question later. Why did Christianity spread so quickly and so extensively? And one of the theories given is that, well, most Romans were pagans, right? They worshipped the gods of, the Greek mythology, Zeus and Hera. And those temples had their own priests, but in Greek mythology, the gods didn't do anything for you. They made demands, but there was no even claim that they would heal you or comfort you or purify you or anything. The gods were just there, and you had to give them stuff. And so when Christianity came along and said, we've got a God who cares about you and will redeem you and will give you eternal life and so forth, that was so much more attractive to the average Roman than the Greek mythological things, that the pagan temples started closing left, right, and center like a failed hamburger chain. And so Sai's question is very important. In a religion such as this, the tabernacle and then later the temple had to do something for the people. Otherwise, why is it there? It can't just be there for us to help God. God has to help us. And so that's a complicated question, but obviously that's one of the reasons there was this covenant concept. The covenant is between God and the children of Israel, and the children of Israel promised to follow God's commandments, mitzvot. In exchange, God promises to help the children of Israel in various ways, religiously, but also economically. If it says this in the part of the prayers after the Shema that are not in the Reformed prayer book. Interestingly enough, God promises if you do everything that I command you, you'll have crops in your field and you'll have affluence and health and so forth. And the Reform movement didn't think that we didn't want to promise that if you do these things, that you would be rewarded. So they didn't want that paragraph in, but it does explain a lot. Okay, Sai, comment, follow up?
Oh, thank you. No, that's good. Good.
Okay. Ellen or Ray or Steve?
Marcia has her hand up.
Okay, Marcia.
So, but with Christianity, they were offering the afterlife, life ever after, after death, etc. And I don't think that's necessarily offered in the Jewish religion, is it?
Not in the same way. I mean, I've heard Christians say Jesus died for your sins. In other words, Jesus died so that you don't have to. So the idea that in Christianity, a lot of stuff that is being talked about is directly beneficial to those who follow the religion. So it was a very modern religion in that it offered people a lot. Now, from an intellectual point of view, you could critique it, but I'm not going to right now. But from an emotional point of view, it might be quite appealing compared to paganism, which made absolutely not only promises, it didn't offer you anything. You gave to the gods, and they might still kill you for no reason as all. They were capricious and selfish, and it was not. I mean, reading the stories, if you read Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology at some point, it's a very entertaining, but those gods did nothing for anybody. They just totally didn't care about humans, unless Zeus wanted a new girlfriend or something. But other than that, we were on our own completely and just had to stay away from them and give them what they wanted so they wouldn't, kill us or hurt us out of vengeance. But the Jewish covenant is quite quite central to Judaism, very central, and that does involve God promising us certain things. But what God promises is limited. It's conditional and it's limited. So it's not going to satisfy someone who's looking for all sorts of unconditional promises. Who's next?
Ellen had her hand up.
I see it, Ellen.
So I took a class, and it may be a reconstructionist concept, I don't know, on the world to come. That Judaism believes in a world to come, which is like the afterlife, I assume. And that the only way you didn't get to go to the world to come was you didn't if you were a woman, you didn't have children. That was one of the things that kept you out of the world to come. Kind of blew me away totally. But is the world to come as a thought process not present in Reform Judaism?
Yes, I mean it is. Olam Haba, and there's very different views on it. So I'd be interested in hearing more about what they said. But Olam Haba would be interpreted in different ways by different interpreters. So I just did, unfortunately, the funeral yesterday for Rhoda, and the prayers in the new Rabbi's Manual and the old Rabbi's Manual are really, they avoid this topic. So I added a little bit, that wasn't there, where I said Rhoda's soul will reunite with God, which is not in the prayers, but I like that concept. And of course, that's a Maimonidean idea, so that if your soul reunites with God, then in the world to come, you're just part of God again. So that's very different than going up to heaven and, reuniting with your family and getting to eat your favorite foods and so forth. So there's different concepts depending on which thinker you think about. But most Jewish thinkers, or certainly the most common ones, have tried to avoid being specific, which is, I think, in today's world, probably more of a deficit than a benefit. So, so maybe we should, Riva's here, so maybe we should put an email to her and suggest as a future course, Jewish views with an S of the afterlife Olam Haba, because, and I remember in Georgia, a woman said, I'm getting older and I most of my family is, passed away, my parents and my siblings, and I really don't like my children that much. And she said that. And Florence, very nice lady. I thought she's a very nice lady. Her children didn't, but I did. And so Florence says, I would really be comforted if I was assured that when I die, I'm going to reunite with my parents and my siblings, and we can all reminisce about old times and eat the old foods that my mother and grandmother served and so forth. So I tried to reassure that maybe that was true, but I also gently tried to say that Maimonides would never have accepted such a view. And later, years later, I found a source in the mysticism where that said exactly that you go back and you're reunited with your family and all those things that she wanted. So I called her up. I was no longer in Georgia. I called her up from Jamaica and I said, Florence, do you remember that conversation we had 4 or 5 years ago about afterlife? And I kind of poured cold water on this idea that you could reunite with your family. And she said, no, I don't recall that conversation. And I said, well, I found out you can get what you want, that there's a view in Kabbalah. And she said, okay. I said, doesn't matter to me one way or the other. So I was sure that she was going to be so happy, but she didn't seem to mind one way or the other. But I was happy that I'd been able to find a source for that. So there's lots of different views on Olam Haba. Ellen, did you want to follow that up? Okay. Marcia and Minya.
So yesterday, one of the comforting things that happened at the memorial service was the family saying that Rhoda would be reunited with her husband, Sonny, and that she would keep him in line, and whatever. He was a character himself, if you knew him, and they're very nice people. And but I had read books with what Ellen was talking about with the life to come. Is that what they call it? Life to come or something like that. And the presence and all the souls in God, not necessarily the bodily part, but all the souls reuniting in some version of heaven. And I think it's very comforting to people to be able to say that. And so many people do find solace in thinking they'll be with their families after death, And it came up a lot yesterday. So
I think it's potentially very comforting. And so I've learned over the years that Maimonides, as much as I respect him, was not a pulpit rabbi, and that, his ideas may not have been geared for congregational life. Minya and then Rochelle, and then Minya and then Rochelle.
I have a question that has to do with what you're just talking about as far as families reuniting after they die. But I had a thought a while ago, and since it came up, I'm going to ask you today. What happens to Holocaust families? They had families before the war that were one set of family. And then after the war, a lot of them had a second set of family. So are they going to, I know there's no answer, but are they going to all unite together?
Yeah, and that would apply to a variety of situations. And, as Minya already said, there's no answer to that. I could find this Kabbalistic source where it says you'll be reunited with your family, but I'm not sure that it would want to get that specific for the very reason that Minya points out, that there's, it could be very awkward up there in heaven, right? and so I don't know, But
I've just thought about it because I know my father had another family before the war and they were killed, murdered. And then, of course, he has the family that I'm part of. And who's to know which one? Like, will he be reunited with my mother and us, or the family that he had before the Holocaust?
I guess it could be like President Mitterrand of France, that he had two families and they both coexisted. I mean, but I would think that in an ideal situation, if this were to actually take place, that God would have enough wisdom that everybody'd be able to,
Coexist.
coexist. I mean, speaking personally, I don't think it's going to be, like it is now, where you actually live in a house and make a, coffee time to meet the rabbi or something. It's going to be much more on a spirit level, where you just kind of interact with these loved ones in a non-corporeal manner. So time and space don't have the same meaning. So
I would agree with that.
okay. Who is next?
Riva and then Rochelle.
One thing about the class today that I find very helpful is I've always wondered what the appeal of evangelicals was. I've been in very poor countries where they have these huge tents and tons of people show up for these, tent get-togethers. They become evangelical Christians. And I knew part of it was that they always provided food. And these are poor countries where people were looking for food. But also I didn't realize to the extent that the offer of a wonderful afterlife is a terrific marketing tool. And I don't know if others of you have experienced this, but I've periodically been told I'm not going to heaven because I'm Jewish. You have to believe in whatever you believe in, Christian, whatever, to get to heaven. And so you're excluded because you're Jewish.
And that's supposed to serve as an inducement to you to embrace evangelical Christianity. There was also an article this week that said that successful religions in America emphasize not only that you're going to have a happy afterlife, but also that they dwell on questions of what's going to happen in the end of days. That talking about the wars at the end of time, that this can really appeal to people now and draw them in. And there was an article that I can't remember what this guy that I know, this was a comedian I saw about a week ago. His name is Moses Storm. He was very good. And it was downtown at the comedy club in downtown. So he told what apparently is a true story about he was raised by parents who were in a cult. And the cult said the end of days is coming. There's going to be plague and pestilence and war and death. And then out of that will emerge the chosen few, which is the people in the cult. And he broke away from this cult, and he said his parents were nuts. And then, remember, this is in a comedy club, but he still said, but then we had COVID. And then we have the Ukraine war. And so he's thinking of calling his mother and apologizing for rejecting her beliefs, that maybe my parents aren't so crazy after all, he mused. So, but then after that, I saw an article that said that exactly this sort of expectations about the end of the world can be very appealing to many people. So starting next week, we're promising heaven for all those who are faithful Reformed Jews. And we're going to start talking about what's going to happen at the end of times. Okay, Pam.
Well, when Christians tell us that as Jews, we're not going to heaven, we just need to remind them we're the chosen people. We're going to have a front row seat.
And that's interesting as well, because there's different types of evangelical Christians, and some indeed hold the Jews in high regard as the chosen people that you described, and others see us as people who are destined for eternal damnation. So there's different belief systems within these evangelical groups. They're not really one group, they're different groups. So there's some really profound differences, and we may not realize this quite so much. Steve and Rochelle.
Okay, well, Rochelle will have the last comment, and then we need to conclude. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Well, Steve, since the end of times may be coming, you don't think we could go another 5 minutes? This could be our very last session till we meet again.
I'm just following the rules of the committee right now.
Oh, no, I just had a comment on that, but it's not really important. We can go ahead and conclude.
No, go ahead. Finish it up.
Oh, just a comment. I think that I've just figured out the difference between heaven and hell is what relatives you have to spend eternity with. And also, as a person whom at both of my stepfather and my father's funeral, both the people preaching at them basically told me I was going to burn in hell because I was not a Christian. So yeah, it's nice to hear, but I know the truth. I was in hell at that moment.
Okay.
Over to you, Steve.
Okay, first of all, Reva, do you have any other announcements that we have for upcoming events? No? Okay. Then let us conclude with the final blessing.
Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natananu Torah
Amen. B'chayei olam nata t'cheinu.
Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Torah.
Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us
the teaching of truth,
implanting within us eternal life.
Blessed is Adonai,
giver of the Torah. Amen. Have a
You'll
great
get
rest of the
better
week,
at the last
everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Stay
Safe.
well, everybody.
Next year in Jerusalem.
This year, get your 4th shot if you need it.
I scheduled mine next Friday.